As Mitt Romney's presidential campaign is sideswiped by a Missouri Senate candidate's understanding of biology, we ask whether Republicans have a problem with science. You're watching Inside Story US 2012 from Washington. Hello, I'm Shihab Ratansi. Todd Akin, who is running for the Senate in Missouri, claimed this week that women could biologically prevent becoming pregnant in cases of, quote, legitimate rape. President Obama couldn't resist quipping that Akin, who is a member of the House of Representatives Science Committee, must have missed science class. Akin has since apologized, and Republicans from all sides of the party have condemned him. But it does seem many in the party do have a problem accepting scientific orthodoxy. All of the main contenders for the Republican presidential nomination, excluding John Huntsman, rejected the notion that climate change is a result of human activity. And Charles Darwin is not a popular figure amongst some sections of the party, with many rejecting evolution and arguing that intelligent design or creationism should be taught in schools. There's also been wide-scale opposition to stem cell research among Republican legislators, with prominent American scientists having to move abroad to continue their research. It's not always been this way. Even Richard Nixon pushed through significant legislation regarding female reproductive health, the environment, and methadone treatment for drug addicts based on the scientific research of the day. So, why do some Republicans mistrust scientists? To discuss this, we're joined by Ronald Numbers. He's professor of the history of science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. From Salt Lake City, Barry Bickmore is professor of geological sciences at Brigham Young University. He's a Republican supporter who has tried to convince Republican politicians in the past that climate change is man-made. And in the studio, Ryan Grimm, Washington bureau chief for the Huffington Post. Professor Ronald Numbers, then, when you heard Todd Akin's comments regarding a woman's ability to reject impregnation, what were your thoughts?
Well, the first one was, he's an idiot.
And beyond that?
That was my second thought, too.
And moving to the next thought that wasn't about the level of idiocy in the senator's brain.
Well, I think one of the underlying explanations for what's going on today is that since Richard Nixon's Southern strategy, a lot of the Republicans are conservative Christians. And this Missouri representative is a member of an ultra-conservative Presbyterian church, not part of the mainstream Presbyterian church. And so this group that he's affiliated with is opposed creation and turns to the Bible for almost everything, so that's not really surprising.
And as you say rightly, he's a representative and not a senator. But when President Obama says that perhaps he missed science class, there is always that suspicion that increasingly science classes are teaching this sort of analysis of biology and so forth. Or is that we're not quite there yet as Texas and other states try and change textbooks and so forth?
Right. There are a number of states that currently are trying to revise their textbooks to include intelligent design or creationism, and they're kind of overlapping concepts, and to downplay evolution, to geological ages, and to promote the idea that science doesn't have to be naturalistic, which is the founding principle of science.
Ryan Grimm, I mean, there is another way of looking at this particular issue, that it's not perhaps simply a matter of belief, but it might be also a certain amount of cynicism in trying to drive an anti-abortion agenda, that if you prove that there's no such thing as a baby conceived through rape, then you don't need an exception for rape in abortion.
Right. So some of it is certainly cynical, and you know, Republicans have gotten a lot of mileage in the past over by denying science. You you mentioned a few of them in the introduction. Climate science is the most obvious one. They were able for 10 or 15 years to kind of muddy the debate to the point where here we are now. We might have passed a number of the tipping points that will make it impossible to turn it around. So there is certainly sort of that, but I think there's also something else going on in the minds of some of these Christian conservatives, and it goes something like this: they would rather believe something absurd than face the consequences of their political positions, and it's true across the board, from climate science to abortion. So take this case. Aiken wants to hold a 100% pro-life position, but that means that he wants a woman who's raped to carry the product of rape to full term and not to have access to abortion. That's kind of a hideous thing to believe. So he doesn't want to believe that he believes such a hideous thing, and so his mind starts concocting these fantasies that a woman can somehow use her supernatural powers to become impregnable when she's being legitimately, quote unquote, raped. And it's the same thing with climate science. They don't want to believe that they support a position that could lead to the ultimate destruction of civilization as we know it. They don't want to believe that. Nobody wants to believe that they support that. So they say, well, the science is questionable. It's in doubt. So let's not do anything now.
Let's raise that with Professor Bickmore. As we mentioned earlier, I mean, you have been trying to explain modern climate science to those within the Republican Party who don't accept it. I mean, clearly there's nothing religious about denying modern climate science. So, I mean, what is it is it there's just a lack of acceptance of the scientific method being used? What do they say when you explain the current theories?
No.
Or the theories?
Well, if you're asking what they say, the problem isn't in their mind that they're denying science so much. It's just that they think that, or they've bought into the idea that the scientists or the scientific community is being somewhat dishonest or biased or something like that. And I wouldn't say it has to do so much with religion or anything, but it definitely has to do with what people want to believe. So for instance, for political conservatives like myself, we have a philosophy that in general we want less government control and intervention and things like that. And if that's your philosophy, then if somebody comes along and tells you that there's this big problem that can't be solved without some kind of carbon tax or government regulations and treaties and so on, you don't naturally want to believe that. And so if somebody else comes along and tells you, oh, there's all kinds of problems with that position, you have a tendency to just believe that as your knee-jerk reaction. So I think that's what is going on here with the Republican Party. Like I said, I'm a Republican myself, but I think the Republicans right now just are in the mode that we want to cut the government spending and cut the reach of the government and so on. And this is, like Al Gore says, an inconvenient truth that we don't want to deal with. It's easier to believe that there's some problem with the science.
By the same token, then, do Republicans, or those Republicans who don't believe in climate science, feel that the Democrats are only seizing on climate science because it does fit in with their ideology that big government and regulation is good?
Yeah, that's the feeling among a lot of Republicans, I think. And I think there might be even some truth to it. I mean, honestly, how many people in the United States, I mean, what percentage of the people actually understand climate science well enough to make informed decisions about how credible it is or not? It's just probably not a very high part of the population, or high percentage of the population. So I just, when it's that sort of situation, I just don't think that people are making their decisions based on science. They're making most of their decisions based on something else.
Yeah, it's an interesting...
if you want an example of somebody who's using this issue to promote a more liberal agenda. Just look at some of the things Naomi Klein has written. I think it was in The Nation or something like that. She was basically saying that for progressives, this is the issue because you can use it as a vehicle to make a lot of things that liberals have wanted for a long time.
But I think she's suggesting it actually proves, though, that the liberal ideology, this is just fundamental proof that what they're saying is right, I suppose, isn't it? Rather than using it cynically. But well, that's probably another issue.
The fact is that any time a big problem is identified that might need some kind of government intervention or anything like that, that automatically favors the liberal side, right?
Right.
So what Republicans need to do is come up with smart ways of trying to deal with these kinds of problems in a way that's more conducive to our ideology, and not just to try and ignore the problem.
So, I mean, there's this thought then that, as you say, we do rely on the scientific consensus of the scientific community. And this is a theme that did seem to come up during the Republican primaries. Here's an exchange between John Huntsman and Rick Perry that's quite interesting.
When you make comments that fly in the face of what 98 out of 100 climate scientists have said, when you call into question the science of evolution, all I am saying is that in order for the Republican Party to win, we can't run from science.
The science is not settled on this. The idea that we would put Americans' economy at jeopardy based on scientific theory that's not settled yet, to me is nonsense. I mean, and I tell somebody, I said, just because you have a group of scientists that have stood up and said, here is the fact, Galileo got outvoted for a spell. But the fact is, to put America's economic future in jeopardy, asking us to cut back in areas that would have monstrous economic impact on this country is not good economics, and I will suggest to you is not necessarily good science. Find out what the science truly is before you start putting the American economy in jeopardy.
Now, Professor Numbers, as a historian of science, that's particularly interesting, I suppose, because in this scenario, then Rick Perry is Galileo. He's being scientifically skeptical against the prevailing scientific paradigm. He's the tenacious minority that is exactly what often drives scientific progress.
That's what he would like to appear to be, but that pose has been tried for centuries now by people who have weird ideas, who say, well, Galileo did, I'm just another Galileo. So most of the time, people who are invoking Galileo are nuts.
Well, okay, well, let's look at this. I mean, it's interesting because there does seem to
Could I add just one comment?
Of course. Sorry, we have this horrible satellite delay, which is slowing things down, but do go ahead.
Okay. Barry was saying earlier that he thought one of the strong motivations was on the part of Republicans, was to keep government out of our lives. However, it was the Republicans who used the political office to try to ban embryological stem cell research. It's the Republicans who are trying to use school boards at the local and state level to prevent the teaching of accepted scientific ideas. So the Republicans are just as happy to use the government to impose their will or anti-abortion laws. They only appeal to freedom from government when it seems to help them.
Very quickly,
I don't think that's
Bickmore.
I don't think that's really a apropos example, though, because in the case of abortion laws and things having to do with stem cell research from embryos and things like that, it's a philosophical question about whether an unborn baby is a person that deserves some kind of protection under the Constitution. And if so, how do you weigh that against the rights of the mother and so on? So, I mean, there's other things. There are other things going on there.
All right, we're going to move on there.
So how do you make a any determination about laws concerning reproductive health if you don't have any kind of moral.
We're going to get away from some of these specific
reasoning for
issues
it.
because we've dealt with some of these issues in detail, but I suppose we're trying to figure out this question because it has been popularized whether the Republicans have something hardwired in them that is simply against scientific method. And what's interesting is there's a researcher at the University of North Carolina. He analyzed responses between 1974 and 2010 of what's called the General Social Survey. It's carried out annually here in the US. He found that trust in science remained stable between 74 and 2010 amongst those who self-identified as moderates and liberals. But there were changes for those who self-identified as conservatives and who frequently attended church during that period. They began the period of study with the highest trust in science and ended with the lowest by 2010 belief in science. So that's the belief in science amongst conservatives have dropped by more than 25% over that period. And the changes, not only that, could not be attributed to falling levels of education. Distrust of science amongst those who were conservative and who attended church rose, particularly amongst the better educated. Ryan Grimm, I mean, the researcher there who did that study suggested this has more to do then with a struggle to define in the 70s what it meant to be a conservative, more than perhaps any necessary belief in individual scientific research that was underway, basically.
Right. I think what you're capturing there is a kind of basic grassroots populism that developed within the conservative movement over the last 30 years or so, particularly connected to the evangelical movement. I'd be curious what Professor Bickmore thinks about this, but it's this rejection of elites that that the media is lying to me. Oftentimes you'll see email forwards that are whipping around right-wing circles that end with, and the way that you know what I'm telling you is true is that you won't see it in the mainstream media.
Well, you see that on the left as well.
But the left will have its own form of media that has its own kind of objective way of trying to identify whether something is true or not. On the right, just something not being reported by CBS lends credence to that very thing. So there was a rejection of media. They said it's captured by liberals, and then there's this rejection of the entire university system, that the university and college system is captured by liberals, and the goal of higher education is to shape American society away from religious institutions and toward a more secular tradition.
And think tanks like the Heritage Foundation and others started sort of springing up as well, which kind of helped give an intellectual basis to some of this.
Yeah, right, exactly. And those were kind of a reaction to that. We're going to build our own intellectual structure to combat this one. And what they did is then they delegitimized it. And science is part of the university and college system. And so that's how you can have a guy like Rick Perry, who he got horrible grades in animal husbandry in college, saying that the scientific consensus around climate change is in question, like as if he has the authority to say that.
And Professor Bickmore, that's very much what the researcher who collated that information, that's very much his conclusion. He also added as well, though, that in the 70s and 80s, science wasn't simply about the space race anymore. It was much more intimately connected to our lives and potentially how our lives are regulated by government. So therefore, that also fitted in with notions of conservatism and small government and so forth. But what do you make of all that?
Well, there's a lot of truth to it. I mean, if you think about what a lot of the results of environmental science and things like that have been over the last few decades. As the population grows, we have a bigger and bigger footprint, and we're causing more problems, and we have to try to not make such a big splash in the world or be better stewards of it. But like I said, whenever there's big problems like that, some of the solutions, at least, I mean, you can use that kind of science to promote solutions that would be more on the liberal or progressive end of the spectrum, and it's sort of a more natural fit. Whereas the conservative end of the spectrum, if you have a big environmental problem, how do you use that to support the idea that the government should get out of it, right? It's
presumably what the conservative solution to this is that it would just be bad business to destroy the Earth. Therefore, we should just let market forces take their course.
Well, that's
not exactly.
Yeah, you can't.
So I'm struggling to find out what the solution is.
Market forces take their.
Yeah, sorry, Professor Numbers.
Yeah, a lot of conservatives are religiously conservative as well as politically, and they don't believe the world's going to be around here long enough to pay much attention to the environment.
Would you accept that, though? I mean, the conservative philosopher Roger Scruton in the UK, actually he's down in Washington, I think, he talks about how actually, weirdly, environmentalism is a conservative, it should be a conservative tenet, because, you're ensuring a healthy planet for the unborn, controlling consumption, there's a sort of spiritual aspect to that and so forth, resisting globalization, preserving the local. These are all very right-wing conservative philosophies, perhaps, he argues, anyway.
I would agree with that.
But they're dueling philosophies among conservatives, among evangelicals, with some of them adopting this stewardship position, and others feeling, and this is not a very minority position, it's quite popular, that the world will end very soon.
And that's all true, but the other element of the right that weighs in here more heavily than any other is the energy industry.
Right.
And so you had Exxon and others funding to the tune of tens of millions of dollars a campaign to spread misinformation about climate change, and it was somewhat in Exxon's interest to deny climate science. I don't see how it's in their long-term interest.
Mitt Romney has just unveiled his energy plan, and it is basically drill, baby, drill, open up protected land and dismantle all regulation and so forth, purely based on the interests of Karl Rove and the Koch brothers, or is there any scientific method?
Now everything has just been captured by this pro-fossil fuel movement, and so that you almost can't support anything else within mainstream Republican field, which is fascinating, because ever since Richard Nixon, even Richard Nixon said we're going to get off of this petroleum-based economy. Every president after Richard Nixon vowed to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels. Every single one, from Nixon to George H.W. Bush to George W. Bush to Obama, everyone in there. Mitt Romney is the first presidential candidate, period, since Nixon, to reject that and say, no, what we need to do is we need to use more fossil fuels. And it's a staggering reversal.
But is this simply a very convenient combination, then, of some of the religious impulses that Professor Numbers is talking about, and the energy industry realizing, hang on, we can use this? Or, I mean, is it really as simple as that?
I think it's a joining together of those forces, combined with the House Republicans' attack on Solyndra and other green energy companies. They thought that they could gin up a scandal with because Solyndra failed, and which is a green company. They built solar panels, had gotten government money. So they try to tie green energy to Obama. Therefore, if you're against Obama, you're against green energy. If you're against green energy, you're for oil. And that's where
Professor Bickmore, I mean, help us understand that. I mean, surely when you speak to Republican politicians, they do have a concern for the welfare of the earth and for not destroying it and so forth. Is it really as simple as that, as campaign contributions and using the beliefs of some in the grassroots level to ensure that you're voted back in again? Or is there no concern at all for science?
No, I think there is a concern for it, but sort of a self-interested concern, meaning they don't want to believe that they're behaving in an anti-science manner or dismissing science, but they'll do it anyway if their interests sort of align and somebody will tell them something that they can latch onto, that will let them believe that what they're doing is in line with their values. And the good news is that carbon dioxide molecules...
Just a second, Professor Numbers.
The good news is that carbon dioxide molecules don't really care what our preferences are, and it's just going to become more and more obvious that this is real. And so at some point, hopefully in the very near future, I think a large proportion of Republicans who sort of dismiss the science right now, or at least suspect it of being not quite right, will come around. I mean, even they've done polling since they've had all the weird weather the last couple years, and more people do believe just because of what they've seen.
All right, we are out of time, I'm afraid. Professor Bickmore, thank you very much. Professor Ronald Numbers, thank you. Ryan Grimm, thank you very much too. That's all from the team in Washington, D.C. for now. Sorry about the satellite delay, it was horrible today.